And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com. And joining me, as always, is Still Curtain contributor Shayne Kubas. Shayne, we're having some tornado warnings up here today. So if I suddenly cut out, that's probably the reason why.
Yeah, I think we can all, give you a pass on that one if that were to take place. So hoping for nothing bad. But
I told my wife not to interrupt me unless there is imminent doom happening. So we're going to finish this show.
All right. Well, hopefully we can at least get that done. But
it's really, there's not all that much news-wise to talk about today, but Shayne and I are going to discuss the wide receiver position, potential trade targets there. We're also going to break down the best and worst case scenarios for the Pittsburgh Steelers in 2024, and then maybe give our most likely scenario as well. Let's start with some NFL trending news today because there's not much going on in the Steelers circle. Brandon Aiyuk had a meeting held with the San Francisco 49ers. He came out and said that he is open to playing elsewhere. And that's no surprise because Jaden Daniels, the Washington's quarterback, came into the meeting with him, which I thought was kind of odd. But what do you make of all of this, Shayne? Like, do you think that Aiyuk is going to be a 49er this year?
It sure seems like he doesn't want to be. And I think the problem here for the Niners is they are in a Super Bowl window. So theoretically, not having Aiyuk on the team, even if it's just for this year, is obviously a bad situation to be in for them.
Yeah.
You're still trying to compete for a Super Bowl. You still have Purdy on this cheap deal, and who knows what you're going to have to pay him or if you want to pay him, all that stuff. Like, you kind of have to try to win in at least the next 2 seasons or so, right? Like, that's your really prime window. Now they could extend it. They have really good players still under contract past the next couple of years. Like, it's not saying that they're done after those 2 years, but I think their prime chance to do so with the NFC still kind of trying to catch up, I think, to them, roster talent wise, especially, is these next 2 years. So ideally you want Aiyuk on the team this year. Past that year, you figure that out. But I think Aiyuk just doesn't want to play that game. Like, I don't think he wants to be in this limbo situation. Like, he either wants paid or he wants out. Like, it's not either. It's one of the two, right? And to me, I don't think they're going to pay him because I don't know if they can. Like, as much as the salary cap is a myth, that whole thing where the Saints and stuff like that just kind of seem to just keep it going, but it's not really working that great for them anyway.
Yeah.
I don't think the Niners want to put themselves in that position where they're constantly juggling the cap and trying to figure out creative ways to, stay under it and all that stuff. I think they want to have a cohesive roster that is sustainable. Paying Aiyuk big time receiver money when you already have Samuel on the books and you don't seem interested in moving him, it just doesn't add up. So I think that he probably won't play for the Niners if they don't pay him. But I do think that they might eventually cave and just say, listen, we'll front load this a little bit. We'll try to get you a lot of money up front. And then maybe they might have to trade him a little bit later down the road after the contract's already up. So it's hard to say, though.
Yeah, if I'm Shanahan and Lynch and the Niners, I'm not doing anything, I think, because of the way that they are right now with their financial situation, knowing that they're in this Super Bowl window, kind of just let this thing ride out. And Aiyuk can be as disgruntled as he wants, but he's under contract for this year on the 5th-year option. They can franchise him next year, which I know the franchise tag is expensive, but he's, in my mind, a top 10 receiver. So it's worth it. You get 2 years of control. You keep him under contract. Now, that's assuming they can get under the salary cap enough next season to make the franchise tag work, because that's money you can't move around. And so, and for that reason, Shayne, you can talk about an extension, backloading it, eating dead money if you have to get out of the deal after a couple of years. But at least for now, they were so close last year. You have to give it another go. If I was a 49ers fan, I would not want them to trade Aiyuk right now, because what is the ultimate goal is to win a Super Bowl. You don't want to get that close to winning it all and then trade one of your best players away. And so maybe they do have the answer there in Ricky Pearsall and the guys that they have, but you don't know that for sure. And so I mean, it clearly looks like he wants a change of scenery here. I don't know if the 49ers are going to grant that or not, but we'll talk about that in our next segment too.
I will say though, too, if I'm the Niners, I would not, like you said, I would not budge on this unless he said distinctly, I will not play for you this year under any circumstance.
Yeah.
Unless I'm extended.
Yeah, it'd have to be like a Le'Veon Bell situation where I'm going to hold out. I'm not, it's fine. I won't play and I won't get my paycheck. So.
Exactly. So at that point, you might as well just strike while the iron's hot and get what you can for him if he's going to refuse to play for you and you're not willing to extend him. So outside of that, though, he should be on the team. I just have this feeling something is going to happen that leads him to not be.
Yeah, and as Steelers fans, Shayne, we know all too well about waiting a little bit too long to trade a player away. Antonio Brown was worth multiple first rounders had they done it a year earlier, and then a
Mhm.
laundry list of things piled up, and
Right.
and nobody wanted him. He sabotaged his trade value with Buffalo, because that's
Yeah.
where the Steelers had something in place for a second round pick. They did the same with Martavis, a little bit too late, got another suspension there. And
Mhm.
so the 49ers obviously don't want to find themselves in a situation where they're looking back on it and say, well, what could we have had in there? But I agree. I think both you and I think that the best course of action for them, hold on to them. You're so close to winning it all. In my mind, they're the best team in the NFC again this year. They probably will claim that first. Like I expect either them, maybe, I think the only other teams in contention, really, them, Detroit, Dallas, Eagles for the top seed there. I would give the 49ers the best chance to do that. So I would just hang on to him. We'll talk more about receivers in a little bit here. Let's shift gears to Tua Tagovailoa, a player that I don't know if we've talked about on this podcast
Not much,
before.
if we
Shayne.
have.
So that shows you how dry the Steelers news cycle is right now. But let's talk about Tua for a second. He is a somewhat relevant player as a quarterback in the AFC, and we can see the direction these contracts are heading. Trevor Lawrence just got $55 million per season, making him the richest quarterback in the NFL, tied with Joe Burrow. That's a lot of money. And Tua basically came out and said, hey, the market is the market. You're going to pay me what the market suggests you're going to pay me. And so there are those out there thinking that he's going to get between the $55 and $60 million per year range for Tua, Shayne. And this is, I don't want to say anything bad. I know that he's been an accurate quarterback. He's been productive, all these things. He's got the fastest pair of wide receivers in the NFL history. He's got Mike McDaniel running the offense. I think his job is, I don't want to say simple because I couldn't do it, but I think in a lot of ways, he's very much aided by the speed of his offense and a mastermind of a play caller. Would you pay Tua, let's call it $55 million a year, put him at the top of the league with Trevor Lawrence? Would you do that if you're a Dolphins fan?
Absolutely not. And I think the problem with the Dolphins right now, and I think fans of Tua specifically, is this is not a case of like whether Tua is good enough to be the starting quarterback for this team long term. Like that's not really the question. It's can you afford to pay him like he's the reason the offense is great, as opposed to the offense being put around him being so great because of like his skill set does fit this offense perfectly. It does, like for what they're asking him to do. The problem is all of the things that he doesn't do well are the things that once things break down, once you go up against playoff level defenses, once you go up against teams that aren't going to be able to or aren't going to let Tyreek run free no matter how fast he is, who aren't going to allow Waddle to get open down the field, and you have to create on your own a little bit. Right now he slimmed down, and there's talks about him doing that because he wants to become a little faster, be able to get out and do stuff on the move more. But the ultimate issue is he's a limited player. He's a limited athlete. He's a limited thrower of the football. There are certain throws that he simply cannot make it on time in rhythm down the field and throwing over the middle with more than just touch and ball placement. It's not the velocity that you need to make those tough throws, right? He just doesn't have that in his tool bag, and it's nothing against him. Like he just can't do it. It's like asking somebody who just can't do. It's not really fair to him, but it's true. Like that's why you don't pay someone like him $55 million a year. You could say the same thing with like Jared Goff to a certain degree, where like how much of that is him versus the offense. But with him, you saw you could get to basically the Super Bowl. Like they should have been in the Super Bowl last year. He proved like I'm good enough to do that. Tua hasn't done that so far. And it's not all his fault or anything like that, but you don't have that as like a reason to say, okay, maybe if we pay him all this money now, even if it looks bad in a couple of years, if he can get us to a Super Bowl and win one, who cares, right? It's kind of what I think is what the Lions are thinking too. But Tua hasn't shown that, right? Like he hasn't shown that he's going to be able to elevate this team in those crucial situations. And I just don't know if he can. Like I just don't know if it's in his ability. And for me, then I'm not paying you even 50 million or 45. Like I just don't know how much I'd be willing to pay him and feel good about it, right? Because it's not about like the market is what the market is. So you're going to have to pay him some enormous amount of money. But what number are you willing to say, okay, we can stomach this and we can move stuff around and make this team still really good around him without it jeopardizing that?
Yeah, Tua's had a really good regular season record.
Certainly
He's been very efficient, but I couldn't agree more with you, Shayne. I don't think that he is that needle moving quarterback that's going to go toe to toe with the best the AFC has to offer. I think in many ways there couldn't be a more perfect situation. I think Miami and San Francisco, those are the two best situations for quarterbacks in the NFL. And
Yeah.
yes, you're right. I think that Tua's skill set fits what Mike McDaniel wants to do perfectly. But man, if you're talking that much money for him, like I don't even care what the alternative is. If I was a Dolphins fan, I'd want them to kind of just move on and maybe see what they can get for him or let him walk after the contract is over with and say, hey, we trust the surroundings here. We trust our skill players in our coaching that we're going to make this work with the next quarterback. I think the absolute last thing a team wants to do, Shayne, is lock themselves into a Daniel Jones-like contract. Now, I'm not saying that Tua is that player.
No,
but
but it's
comparatively, though, if he gets 60 million compared to Daniel Jones's 40 million a year, that's a bad contract for Tua. No matter how you look at it, Patrick Mahomes is making $45 million a season, folks. And so that's what he signed such a team-friendly 10-year deal, which I don't know why his agent let him do that. But
I think he was just comfortable with the fact that like he kind of is doing not quite the Brady thing, but similar where, okay, I'm going to get well compensated. I'm not going to ever have to worry about money ever again. I'm on this team for the next decade. But now we have so much movement ability because of how long the contract is. We can move money. We can do things. It gives him a lot of flexibility and it also gives the team a lot of flexibility. So I think that's like, it was a smart deal for both sides to a certain degree, but definitely favors like the overall health of the roster more so than just Patrick. So,
yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's something worth monitoring at least because if and when the Steelers find another quarterback, Shayne will be in the same situation. So I think if anything, it's making the argument that maybe you should go like the rookie contract route, like try out a quarterback during his rookie contract and see if he ends up being that guy that can take you there with a good supporting cast. But an argument to be made for sure. All right, here's news that's a little bit more relevant to the Pittsburgh Steelers. James Washington, former second-round pick in 2018, is attempting a comeback in the NFL. Washington suffered a Jones injury with the Dallas Cowboys a few years back, landed on the Saints, somewhere else. I can't remember where he was right now. But he hasn't played football in a couple of years. This is a guy that led the Steelers in receiving in 2019 at the hands of Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges, of all folks. And so is Washington even worth giving a second look at this stage of his career? I think he's 28 years old now. Oh, he's a fairly sure-handed guy, kind of just an awkward body type, like a 5'11", 213-poundish receiver who was a kind of a short, squatty, deep threat. But does he offer anything to this? Can he beat out a Van Jefferson, a Quez Watkins? Is a guy worth signing to a veteran minimum contract, Shayne?
I think if he's fully healthy, then sure, because he's been productive in the NFL, and unless his athleticism has taken a huge dip, which at 28 theoretically wouldn't be the case. Like you have to see what he looks like, fully removed from all the injury stuff. But he's a guy that has started games and played well in the NFL. I think that a team should at least give him a look, assuming, like I said, the medicals are good. I don't know if he's ever going to be the level of impact that he was a few years ago and also in 2019. Like I just don't know if that's in the cards for him. But I think that there are receivers on rosters currently who would make an opening day roster that aren't as good as him theoretically, right? Like that aren't going to be the amount of impact on offense as he could potentially be. So yeah, I think veteran minimum, bring him into camp, see if he's healthy. I wouldn't mind that for the Steelers or really for any other team that's looking for receiver depth.
Yeah, I think it comes down to health for him too. Are you healthy enough to make it at this point? It's his skill set was always kind of odd to me.
He's an odd player too. It's he's a very weird, like
he's
technically
kind of
a possession guy.
But he's you're a possession guy that wins down the field at 5'11", but you don't have elite deep speed. And so I don't know. I wouldn't mind, throw a dart, whatever, bring him in if you want to bring him in just on a zero risk contract to get out of it with no dead money, whatever.
Yeah, it's just a training camp
that's fine with me, but yeah, not a needle mover at all. I don't think anybody would expect that to be, especially at this stage of his career. Anything else you want to get to, Shayne, right now?
No, like I said, kind of that time of year, like before training camp, after
we have reached it.
Yeah, so
100%. All right, we're going to move on. Let's talk about Steelers wide receiver trade options. If you guys are joining us here in the live chat as well, please drop any questions for us that you might have in here, and Shayne and I will see if we can answer those for you. Let's talk about Steelers wide receiver trade options potentially here. We don't know if the Steelers will trade for a receiver, obviously, but we do know that there was interest there. There's been interest for months now. Going back to the NFL draft, we had confirmation the Steelers indeed reached out to the 49ers for an asking price for Deebo Samuel. Brandon Aiyuk's been a name that's linked to them. So let's talk about some of these potential players. Which ones could realistically be dealt by their current teams, and which ones would actually move the needle enough for the Steelers to make a play? And should they do this, Shayne? So let's talk about the potential options here. Outside of the pair of receivers with the 49ers, who else should the Steelers at least consider and reach out and call a front office to ask about their wide receivers?
I still think the main guy, and I've said his name multiple times, the one that makes the most sense to me is Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. And it's a twofold thing. One, it's familiarity with Russell Wilson, who, again, we've talked about, is overwhelmingly the favorite currently to start this season as the quarterback for this team. Now, granted, we don't know how long that'll last for, all that good stuff. We'll talk kind of about that a little bit later today too. But in general, we expect him to open the season as a starter. So you have familiarity there as well. You have another ball winner type, which with the way Wilson plays, he's not going to target the middle of the field a ton. He's not going to take a lot of the short, easy stuff. And if it is short, easy stuff, it's going to be like check downs to the tight ends and the running backs. You want somebody who can get down the field, who can make plays on the football like George Pickens can too. Like, so you have two of those types of guys then. It just makes a lot of sense for the direction the offense is probably going to go, where there's going to be a lot of two receiver sets. It gives Roman Wilson the opportunity to be a full-time slot player, which I think is where he's going to ultimately end up in the NFL for us. So kind of just gets him there right away and just makes everything a little bit more cohesive offensively. So that's the guy that I'm mostly focused on. I think it makes the most sense because I also don't think he's going to cost that much. He is approaching 30. His contract isn't anything crazy, but it's enough where it's like, the Broncos could probably use the relief. I don't really think he's in the future plans for this team. It just makes a lot of sense from both sides.
Yeah, you go back to that situation, trading Deontay Johnson is like, he wasn't getting with the program. I understand that, but in hindsight, it's like, all right, we're going to give up more draft capital to go get a guy that's going to have a similar impact, who's older than Deontay and won't be part of the long-term plan. Anyway, it is an interesting situation, and not that trading Deontay wasn't the right decision. We'll have to see how that plays out. But obviously they wanted to move in a different direction with where their offense was going. And he wasn't part of that. I agree. I think Sutton is the guy that we've kind of pointed to for several months now. You talk about price point, potential impact on the team. I mean, he's certainly still a wide receiver 2 capable player. I think Pickens certainly is the go-to guy over him still, if he joined the Steelers. But gives you enough in that regard, is experienced, lots of production over the years, doesn't offer much after the catch, but that's all right. I don't think the Steelers are necessarily prioritizing that with their way their offense is moving. They'd rather have those big possession type receivers that can also block. And so I think that Sutton fits that mold. To me, Shayne, it comes down to price for him. And it's kind of always been about that. It depends on what the Broncos would be willing to do to part with him. Is it going to cost a 3rd round pick or a 4th round pick? Because I might put my foot down at the 3rd rounder. I might actually do it and say, hey, look, you're not going to have this guy part of your team for much longer anyway. Let's do the 4th round pick. Let's do the 4th round pick and change maybe, and we'll make it work. Because the Steelers in the 3rd round, they've gotten guys who can be kind of pivotal pieces moving forward, potentially Roman Wilson, Peyton Wilson, Darnell Washington. They got Herbig in the 4th round. And so I hate parting with draft capital when Omar Khan and Andy Weidel have been drafting so well these first 2 seasons as GM and assistant GM. And so that's where my hesitation would be. Yes, it does make the team better right now. So there's a case to do it anyway, even if you get the opportunity to. If you think that it moves the needle from 9 wins to 10 win season, maybe you can sneak one more win in there because of the upgrade in receiver play. If you think it's worth it there. And look, it makes the depth chart look better, right? You have Pickens and Sutton as your outside wide receivers. You have Roman Wilson, maybe Calvin Austin in the slot. It just works out better that way because we just don't know who profiles as that number 2 guy. I mean, I'm not a fan of Van Jefferson. I don't think he's been good in several years now. I think it's probably going to have to be Roman Wilson, though he is undersized and a rookie. And so it comes down to that. How much do you trust that? Another option that has been floated out there, Shayne, and as wild as some of these might be, DK Metcalf, who ironically enough, just a video was posted today of Russell Wilson working out with DK Metcalf, throwing the football to each other, which again, they were teammates just like Sutton and Russell Wilson were teammates. So we don't want to read too much into that. But Metcalf is another guy. We don't know how much longer he's going to be part of the Seahawks organization. If they're looking to move into a different direction here, if that's the case, the Steelers would obviously have to give up more for a younger, fresher Metcalf who offers a little bit more because of his speed and some of the things that he can do that way. Is that one, Shayne, just theoretically, if this was even on the table, is it too similar to what the Steelers already have in Pickens to make a big trade for a wide receiver and then turn around and pay him a lot of money as well?
I think Metcalf would be very fun, but I do think that not so much that their skill sets are similar, but I think that at that point you're paying too much for a receiver room that might not be that important in this offense. Like that's kind of the main thing. I think Sutton is the middle ground of like his contract's not terrible. It's not going to cost that much to acquire him. It raises the floor of the offense, but you're not going for broke with the offense, right? You're not going for broke with the receiver room because Wilson, I do think, is ultimately going to become this team's number 2 at some point, I hope, in terms of targets. And I want it to come from the slot. So I want there to be a reliable number 2 outside receiver on the roster. But I don't think you need to pay as much as you would for Metcalf to do that. I would be more interested. Now, I think he's a Seahawks lifer, but I'd be more interested in Lockett for like a couple years because I think that he would be great for in a lot of ways from both like a mentor standpoint and on the field. Like I think he'd be closer to what I'd want from the receiver 2 position. But still, I think Metcalf is probably just a little too steep in a lot of different ways. Yeah.
And ironically enough, Lockett, I actually used him as the high-end player comparison for what Roman Wilson could be in the NFL if his career path goes very nicely. But Shayne, if the plan here was to say we're going to have Russell Wilson and or Justin Fields scramble around, throw the ball deep down the field like they've done in past years, maybe Metcalf and Pickens would be an awesome pairing. But
it'd be an awesome pairing.
I don't think it's what they want to execute though. And so it comes back down to it. You look at the history of our Arthur Smith offense. We've got 5 years now, 2 in Tennessee, 3 in Atlanta. Is a wide receiver 2 valuable enough to spend this type of resources on it, knowing that it's like everything funnels through the wide receiver 1, and then it's like a group of tight ends, a group of receivers. They're all kind of in that mix after that. There isn't really a wide receiver 2 historically with Arthur Smith as far as production goes. And so I would be hesitant to do something, like you said, more than the Courtland Sutton trade. The problem is there's only a couple of these needle movers out there. I think it's Aiyuk. I think Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf, and then maybe Courtland Sutton. Maybe you can steal a game one way, swing a game one way or the other because of the upgraded play there. Outside of those guys,
floor raiser type guy though too. Like
floor raiser for sure.
He helps you keep the offense. Like if Pickens is having a bad day or Russell needs bailed out, like he helps.
Pickens gets injured. You've got it. You've got to yes.
Right. Exactly.
So is there anybody else outside of those for high profile receivers, Shayne, that you would even have in consideration, somebody that could potentially be on the table?
I mean, it's tough because I think teams are kind of hoarding weapons at this point because it's really valuable.
They know how valuable. Yeah.
They know how like having 4 guys at receiver is becoming more and more important because one, injuries obviously happen and you want another guy that can step in and be a starting caliber player. But more importantly, like teams are just starting, especially the best offenses are starting to incorporate more types of receivers and spreading things out more in certain ways, or even if they're condensing things, they kind of bring in different types of players for those situations. So I think it's really hard to acquire someone that's actually going to upgrade the room without giving up a significant amount of draft capital like we talked about.
Yeah, for sure. And if we're talking about not needle movers, but guys that maybe could add something to the team, we can look at Robert Woods from the Texans, who they kind of have a surplus of receivers at this point. I think he's expendable, but again, it's like, all right, how much better is Woods than Jefferson? Similar type players in their role, can play in the slot, can play outside. Probably not worth giving up draft capital for a guy like that at this stage in his career. And then Juju Smith-Schuster of the New England Patriots. I don't know if he's going to fit in their future plans. They drafted 2 receivers relatively high this year, Jalen Polk and John, name's escaping me at the moment. Oh, my UCF guy.
I know. Yeah, I know who you're talking about. I can't remember his name right now either for some reason.
Yeah. And so
Javon Baker.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how much work he's going to get there either, or if he's got anything left in the tank. He was pretty bad his last year in Pittsburgh, efficiency wise. And so, I think that's really it. I mean, there's just a couple guys out there that could potentially be on the market. Nobody wants to trade receivers. It's why they get drafted early in the first round. It's why you see like 4 to sometimes 6 receivers go in the first round every year. My goodness, Ricky Pearsall and Xavier Legette were first round picks this year in the NFL because teams know how valuable the wide receiver position is. So they're not giving him away like free candy here. You're going to have to fork up if you want one. So Shayne, let me ask you this, and we'll move on to our next topic. Will a trade for a wide receiver, any wide receiver, will it get done this year, let's say before the start of the season, or even before the trade deadline for the Steelers? Can you envision a scenario where it's like, all right, these guys just are not cutting it. Roman Wilson's not there yet. Calvin Austin's not the guy, whatever the case may be. If you had to put a percent chance on a trade happening, let's call it before the trade deadline, which was actually pushed back a little bit further this year, what do you think that percent is?
I think it's kind of 50-50. I really think I don't think it happens before the season. I think that they want to see if this group is good enough. At least I think they want to give these guys a chance to prove that they are good enough for this group, so they don't have to invest more into the position this year. But I think that when we get to, week 8, 9, whatever week it is that the trade deadline is now, I think is it 10 now or 11, something like that?
I think they just moved it back a week,
something
if I recall. So it was like November 1st, and I think
it might be like week 9 now. If we're halfway through the season and Pickens is the entire passing offense and no one is getting anything done, Roman Wilson's not ready to contribute, Calvin Austin isn't, kind of building off of his strong, summer that he had so far, then I think that Khan will say, okay, like we're trying to win still, we're trying to be a good team. I'm willing to, at least go explore options. And I think that might be a good time, because if Sutton is kind of getting phased out of the offense a little bit, or if he's just not really doing enough for Peyton to care to have him, then you might be able to get him for a little less, right?
Yeah.
Maybe a fourth straight up does get it done, or maybe even like a fifth or something. Like that would be more likely to me. But I do feel like they're trying to see if they can get enough out of this group for now, though.
Yeah, I think that would be the benefit of waiting closer to the trade deadline. It could work the other way too. Maybe the Steelers George Pickens gets injured or whatever,
right? And
then they become desperate, and you have to give up more than you wanted to. But I can see it also working the other way, where it's like, all right, this guy he's not cutting it for us, or we're looking to go with somebody younger, whatever the case may be. Then maybe you can go and get a discount receiver before the deadline. If I put a percent chance on it, Shane, I think it would only go with like 35 to 40%. I think the longer we move through the process now, and because it didn't happen during the draft, like many people thought it would by then, that was the big thing. I think I probably would have had like a 70% chance before then, and now I would go all the way down to like 35-40% chance of something getting done. I think the Steelers are likely to roll with what they have, and just knowing Omar Khan and Andy Weidel like we do in this short amount of time, I think they want their guys to be the guys. Like it seems like they're kind of weeding out some of the recent Kevin Colbert picks in are having their guys step up into these prominent roles now. And I think they want Roman Wilson to be that guy that steps into that spot. And so we'll see what happens there. But that's what I would put on it. What would you guys put on it? Let us know in the live chat here, or drop it in the comments section. All right. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. And we do this show live every Wednesday. Josh Yorish does the show live every Monday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. So if you're only catching our show, you're not catching his, make sure you also tune in on Monday. Josh just had an awesome show on Monday. He redrafted the last 5 years of the Kevin Colbert era, which is such a great idea, because those 5 years were a disaster. He breaks down which direction the Steelers should have gone with those selections. I could talk all day about that, because over the last, I think it was 6 years now, Shane, I have been tweeting out my selections for the Steelers as they are on the clock. And I can tell you my track record looks pretty decent. I don't want to pat myself on the back too hard here, but my track record looks pretty decent compared to what Kevin Colbert did. That was kind of a rough stretch.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah. So good job on that with Josh there. So.
All right. Well, Shane, let's talk about the best case and worst case scenarios for the Pittsburgh Steelers in 2024. We're going to talk doom and gloom first, and then sunshine and rainbows. So worst case scenarios, Shane, for the Steelers, like if things just don't fall their way this year, like what are the worst things that can happen for them? And what would be the worst outcome of the season? Because in my mind, Shane, it's not necessarily going like having like 4 wins. I think there's a scenario that's worse than that maybe keeps you in limbo. I don't know. I mean, there's an argument to be made there for sure. So I want to start with you. What is your worst case scenario for Steelers this year? And then I'll follow up.
It's funny you said that because my worst case scenario is not going to be a 2-15 bottoming out season. I think the worst case scenario, and I'll kind of break it down in parts here. So the worst case scenario is that they start the season, Russell Wilson's the starting quarterback, and they are playing good, not great football. So they're maybe 4-4, 5-3 as we're approaching the deadline. That big end of season stretch is coming up, and they decide, you know what? We're kind of in the middle of it. We need more pieces. They do go ahead and attack the trade deadline aggressively. They add pieces. They give up draft capital. Then they add pieces where they think they desperately need it. Maybe it's corner, maybe it's receiver, whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. Then that back half of the stretch of the season comes, and they fight really hard in a couple of those games, but they finish the season like 8-9, 7-10. They have that first losing season under Tomlin, but it's not a bad season. It's just a mediocre season. And then the questions start flying of who's the quarterback of this team going to be? How are you going to get him? You're picking 14th in the draft, 12th in the draft. This bad quarterback class. And it just creates an offseason where there's so many questions and very little answers to what they can do moving forward to kind of get out of that period of time we've been in where it's the 9 wins, the playoff exit immediately, that type of stuff. But it's a worse version of it because there's no excitement really. It's more just, we got in at the end. Let's see what we can do. This didn't happen. It's just a mediocre season that nobody wanted. And they kind of just left wondering what would have been if we would have done some different quarterback or not traded those assets away at the trade deadline. That's kind of, to me, like the breakdown of what the worst possible scenario would be.
Yeah, Shayne, I'm not far off from yours.
Yeah, exactly.
So my worst case scenario for the Steelers this year would be Russell Wilson not only starts the season, he plays all year long.
Yeah,
never see
Justin. You get nothing from Justin. Yeah,
and I think the reason why that would be a bad scenario is because there's more than a decade age difference between the two. Wilson turns 36 years old during the season this year. Fields just turned 25, and so there's something to look forward to with Fields. Yes. Now, the hope is dwindling. He's entering year 4 of his NFL career. If he is a franchise guy, I think the chances are slim. I think there's no chance that Wilson is a franchise guy because he just doesn't have the longevity in him at this point. He was with Seattle. Yeah. So my worst case scenario starts with Russell Wilson. And if Russell Wilson plays awesome, that's great. That's not my worst case scenario. My worst case is he plays just well enough to keep the job, almost Pickett-like in a sense where you're winning games 17-13, 13-10, that kind of thing. And you're making your money off the backs of your defense. Yeah. Wilson's not doing much to aid the offense. He finishes the season with like 20 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, 6.8 yards an attempt. And in the Steelers' mind, because Pittsburgh got to 9 or 10 wins, which they normally do, that will be enough for Mike Tomlin and company to say, all right, let's give Russell Wilson a contract extension at age 37 or 36, 37, maybe even 38 years old. Let's ride this wave out. We came close enough by our standards of plateauing that we're going to live with Russell Wilson for the foreseeable future. I think that would extinguish all hope that reasonable Steelers fans have of either Justin Fields being the guy or them finding that next franchise quarterback, because we saw that as good as Russell Wilson has been in his career, just like Ben Roethlisberger, there comes a day for all quarterbacks. And I think that day is rapidly approaching for Wilson. He could surprise me. He could have a good bounce back season. We've seen 3 years in a row of mediocrity from this guy, 1 year in Seattle, the last 2 years in Denver. I just don't feel confident enough in almost any situation that he's going to be a guy worth paying and worth starting at age 36 and 37 years old. And so that would be my worst case scenario, is narrowly missing the playoffs in that situation. It's different if you can actually go on a run with Wilson, then maybe there's a case to be made. Right. Maybe there's a case to be made to bring him back on a 1-year contract or whatever. We'll see what the market looks like for him. I can't imagine it would be very big considering his age and history at this point. But that would be my worst case, is doing just enough to get to that 500 season, missing the playoffs, keeping Russell Wilson and Justin Fields not seeing the field, never knowing what potentially could have been. And like I said, I don't expect Fields to be the guy, but I at least want to know. Like, I'd rather see a scenario that shows me who Fields is exactly on a fresh start in a new organization with more talent around him. And if he's not the guy, then he's not the guy. You draft and you move on, because you look at almost every scenario out there, with very few exceptions. You can look at like the Rams who traded, vice versa, the Lions who traded with the Rams. There's a couple teams who've got their quarterback via trade or via free agency. Everybody else that's competitive drafted their guy, and they went through the process. They went through the down years, with the exceptions of the Chiefs. All these teams went through these down seasons in order to get there. So to me, Shayne, having a 2, 3, or 4 win season is not the worst case scenario.
No.
It's plateauing again for the ntth year, and not being able to do a blasted thing about it, and keeping an aging quarterback for the foreseeable future just because you want to run it back again. So along with that, I would also even throw in there maybe naively throwing like a first or second round pick in a wide receiver trade just before the deadline, to try to give yourselves a spark, and it doesn't do enough. So now not only are you looking at a dollar future with Russell Wilson, you're looking at less draft capital to work with in the coming years. So that would be my worst case scenario. Shayne, let's talk about our best case scenario. We outlined that doom and gloom. What's your best case scenario for the Steelers this year?
So this one's a little bit convoluted, but I do have an answer for this one that I think makes a lot of sense. So I want, in this case, the season starts and the Steelers are, let's say they're 1-2 to start the year. And a lot of the reason why is because Russell Wilson, it's not that just that he's playing poorly, is that he is turning the football over. He is doing the one thing that Tomlin, I do not think, will be willing to deal with, right? That's what happened to Trubisky. It's going to be a similar thing, I think, with Wilson, if that were to happen, where he says, all right, I can't do this anymore. He's not creating explosives. He's turning the football over. Time for Justin Fields to see what he can do. Fields comes in, and yes, he is very chaotic. There's a lot of stuff that's going on that isn't always what the offense is supposed to be, but he's moving the football with his legs. The running game is flourishing with him as the quarterback. The passing game is good enough. Pickens is bailing him out a lot, making a lot of big plays down the field. And the defense is kind of feasting off that energy, right? Every time there's a big play, they're ready to go. They're playing up to their standard. We get to the middle of the season. They're now, 6-3 or whatever it is, right? They're winning a lot of games. They do add at the deadline, but now for somebody to act that actually is reasonable and actually helps them create a better floor for the offense, with Fields kind of being that chaotic type of quarterback, right? Gives him more options to kind of help calm him down a little bit, right? The offensive line is gelling well with a lot of young guys that are playing well. You get through that last stretch of the season. You lose the ones that obviously you're kind of expected to lose, but you finish the season with 11 wins. You're in the playoffs firmly. The division, you don't win that because it's just kind of hard to do that with that stretch at the end of the year, but you get a favorable playoff game of some kind. Maybe it's trying to have the Dolphins come in. We were just talking about Tua. Maybe they're kind of in that weird scenario where you're playing them or whatever. And you win a playoff game, you compete for a second playoff game, probably don't win it. I don't think this team is capable of winning 2 playoff games in the best case scenario even, but it gives you hope that Fields can be the answer quarterback, and you don't have to now try to, whether it's trade up or overpay for another quarterback. He does enough where you don't have to pay him a ton of money necessarily, but you have to pay him kind of like one of those mid-level contracts, and it helps you keep your cap from being crazy. And then they can continue to build up this roster through the draft.
I like it, Shayne. And I'm going to go, again, a similar route here. I think that not only, I mean, if Fields ends up being the guy, that saves you in multiple ways. You don't have to trade up in the draft. You don't have to spend a first-round pick on a quarterback. So in that chance that he becomes that, I mean, that is the best case scenario. That is, I think that's the biggest thing
that's
for the future that fans could look forward to. Russell Wilson maybe struggles early on, hopefully not at the expense of the team, but just
not
enough
too
to
terrible.
say, enough to say to make a change at the position. Like you said, maybe it's turnovers and the Steelers are still finding ways to win football games. Although I do have a feeling if the Steelers are winning, that's enough to keep them in the lineup. We'll see. It was enough for Pickett. It's been enough in the past. So, but that making that switch in the first half or even first quarter of the season to Fields, seeing a really impressive run by the 25-year-old quarterback down the stretch of the season, showing that he can go to toe-to-toe with some of these impressive quarterbacks he's going to be playing late in the year, whether it's Jalen Hurts. Probably, I know we can't expect to do it against Patrick Mahomes, but Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow putting up fights against these guys and maybe winning some shootouts. Like if I'd rather see, Shayne, honestly, I'd rather see the Steelers start winning some shootout games rather than beating teams like 13-10, because we know the defense is capable of playing well. They got a superstar in TJ Watt, and they've got good pass rushers, and Porter looks good, and Minka's still there. What we need to see is some life in this
something.
lifeless offense. And so it's been we spent 5 years with Randy Fichtner and Matt Canada combined, and we need to see something else outside of that. And so if Fields can show hope of being that guy, it allows you to do so much flexibility with your draft capital next year. So it's like quarterback is one thing we don't have to look at. Let's sign Fields. I don't think the market will be all that big for him, even if he has a good year, because there's a lot of teams that didn't like him coming into the 2021 NFL draft. And when they had a chance to trade for him after 3 years in Chicago, there was no market. And so I had kind of a feeling that even if Fields performs really well in the second half of the year, I don't think there's going to be a bidding war for his services, at least not by many teams. And so the Steelers get him locked up to a contract. You've got so much flexibility when it comes to the draft. Now that your offensive line is looking pretty good, you can go spend it on whatever BPA. Just go the BPA route for the third season in a row in April. And so I think that would be the best case scenario. Like you said, maybe get to 11 wins, maybe get that first playoff win. You got to get that playoff drought ended right now. Can't go 8 years. It's already been 7. And so find that matchup, get that playoff win. It's unreasonable to expect a lot more than that. But Fields shows the ability to go toe to toe with these guys. And I'll even throw in this as well, just for fun, Shane. TJ Watt gets his second DPOY.
Oh yeah, that's
leads
what
the
you
league.
hear.
Leads the league in sacks as well. You got to have some secondary to root for in case the Steelers get knocked out of the running, or heaven forbid things come down to week 18, like they always seem to do. And the Steelers need some help to get into the tournament, but there's always something else to look forward to there. So TJ Watt gets his trophy again this year. Most likely scenario, Shane, I'm sure we'll do probably one of these right before the season comes out, but how do you think this is all going to play out this year?
Oh, wow. Most likely scenario. I can't imagine what that would be. Well, the team wins 9 games. They win them in unspectacular fashion. Russell Wilson is like the 22nd best quarterback in the NFL by like every metric. The offense is about 3 points per game better than they were the last couple of years. The defense is still very good, but has a couple bad games that allow this team to kind of fall into that 9-8 territory. And they are a game away from the playoffs, and something happens in week 18 that doesn't go our way, actually, for once. And we end up missing by a hair, and everyone stops and looks around and goes, what do we do about this? Like, what do we have to do to get over the hump? And the answer is always going to be the quarterback until it's the answer. And I just think that's the most likely thing. I know it's kind of like your worst case scenario, but I think it's more straight up just what we actually came to expect. What we've come to expect with this team, which is the offense is the X factor. Can they do anything at all that is interesting? And if they can't, the team will still win 9 games because Mike Tomlin refuses to lose games. But if they can, maybe we can get that 10th or 11th win and find our way into the playoffs with a little bit of momentum for once.
All right, Shane. I agree. I think that the most likely scenario for the Steelers this year, they execute the game plan that Mike Tomlin wants and has had for this team, which is to play good defense and run the ball effectively. I think their defense finishes inside the top 10 this year. I think their offense, like you said, improves by a few points. It's not going to be a touchdown difference. I don't think even with the changes going from Matt Canada to Arthur Smith and Kenny Pickett to Russell Wilson, I don't think it makes that big of a difference in the point differential category. And I think that when we talk about that statistic there, I think the Steelers are right in the middle of the league, probably in point differential, maybe a little bit in the negative. They were a lot in the negative last year, which is not where they want to be. But I think that they execute the game plan they want to. It gets them to a 9-win season. And then from there, it's you're just narrowly missing the playoffs. You have something to play for. I think that streak continues as you go into the final week of the season with something to play for, and they ultimately fall just one game short of making the tournament. And then the chaos ensues. 8 years in a row without a playoff win. Why did Steelers give Mike Tomlin a 3-year contract extension?
Well,
and we'll go through all of these conversations next offseason, like we had this offseason. And I think that it just feels that way, like they've kind of plateaued right there, and I just don't know what's going to get them over that hump. Obviously, I hope that's not the case. I can see also the Steelers starting the season off very good, having a strong start to the season, maybe even being like 6-2 in their first 8 games. And then it strikes week 11 to week 18. You play the Browns twice, Bengals twice, Ravens twice, Eagles on the road, and Chiefs on Christmas Day. And that is just such a brutal stretch that I think that it'd be hard to predict them finishing really strong at the end of the season. So that is my prediction there. Anything else that you wanted to add, Shane? Are you good?
Honestly, what I just want to say with this team is I don't think I can really say that I expect them to be great, but what I do want them to be is if I can't ask for them to be great, I want them to be interesting. Because the thing that the Steelers have done to us is they've become so consistent that it's not good anymore, in the sense that we know, okay, if the Steelers are 6-3 to start the year, they're going to falter a little bit down the stretch because they're either playing good teams or something weird happens where they lose to the Cardinals, just throwing that name out there, not like they did that last year, or whatever team, right? And then they end up in the same spot of 9-8, 10-7.
Yeah.
I just want something more interesting to happen this year. I want a 40-point blowout game to happen one way or the other, honestly. I don't really know if I care that much which direction it is. I want, some crazy stat line from Russell Wilson one week that's just hilarious that we look back on. Remember that 5-touchdown game by Russell Wilson in 2024? I just want something to happen where I'm like, man, I have to keep watching this game because I don't know what's going to happen here. Because we know what's going to happen half the time. Half the time they're going to have some sort of weird touchdown late when the offense did nothing all game, and they'll win, like you said, 17-14. And then the other game, it's going to be the offense scores 4 points, or 3 points in the first half. We're just clawing back, and then we just barely don't make it. And then we kind of just know what we're getting most of the time. I don't want to know every week what I'm getting, basically. That's kind of my ask for the year.
Yeah. And the predictability has just been too much. I feel like not only with how each season turns out game by game, how the play calling has been. The Steelers tip their hat and tell defenses exactly what they've done in the past, at least under Matt Canada, based on your personnel grouping, based on your alignments. So is Miles Boykin out there?
Yeah, so Miles Boykin out there. Yeah.
He's obviously not around this year, but will they have the same tells? Are they going to, will Smith be creative enough to at least fix that part of the offense where you're not showing what you're doing every time?
I sure hope so.
Yeah, but I agree with you. I think that predictability is killer. It takes a lot of the excitement out of the game. So let's make it unpredictable. Let's make it fun. Obviously, Shane and I, we're always going to root for the Steelers to succeed and to do well. We want to see them do that. We're a little bit pessimistic at this point that we'll see it happen until we see it happen, because it's been so long of just kind of stagnant play here.
I honestly kind of hope, this is one more thing, I kind of hope they are the worst preseason team in the NFL. I want no expectations.
Yeah, the preseason has not carried over at all.
I do not want the Kenny Pickett masterclass preseason. I want Russell Wilson to play 4 snaps and get picked off all 4 throws he throws. I want Justin Fields to look like he doesn't know what a football is. I want all that, because then no one cares. We're going to go one of the the Falcons are, I know they did some weird stuff in the draft, but they're a pretty good team. They should beat the Steelers, and then we just beat the brakes off them, and it's all right, cool, we're off and running. Let's go.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is the best possible outcome there. All right, you guys can follow us on Twitter. You can follow Shane on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. We go live every single Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time on the show. I will have a week off coming off here pretty soon. I'll be on vacation, but we'll let you know when that is. Thanks again for joining us on the show today. You can download the Steel Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcast. Also check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Steel Curtain podcast. And thanks again for listening to the Steel Curtain podcast.